You're on Twitter. You're also a left media personality. I hope you don't mind me using that term. I apply it to my colleagues as well. Do you think that the left should get off Twitter? Do you think it does feel like it's something of a drain in terms of attention, resources, time, and it feels like if all that was just directed into local media projects, national media projects, starting new things, empowering, existing and preceding sort of efforts, perhaps that would be a better use of time. I mean, what are your thoughts on that?
I would love if there were actually a movement to do just that. I used to think that Twitter was necessary in order to remain relevant in media, to promote your work. And I think if you're disciplined enough to avoid your mentions and disciplined enough to avoid, some of the mob culture that takes place on social media platforms like Twitter, it can be useful. But the problem is it's incredibly difficult to not be influenced by certain things that go on Twitter. And, I just see many insincere interactions happening, a lot of bad faith arguments. And I bring that up because those arguments aren't about working out differences or having a conversation to find some common ground. Capitalism has a huge negative impact on media and on media personalities because everyone's fighting one another to be the most unique, to be the most interesting, to be the most entertaining, because that's what you need to do in order to earn enough money to survive, especially if you're in independent media. So when I talk about the incentive structure to essentially be a terrible person on social media, that's what I'm talking about. Whether they know it or not, whether it's totally conscious or subconscious, people definitely engage in all sorts of disingenuous nonsense, hoping that someone will write about it, it'll get a little bit of attention, and that nonsense catfight will give them some legitimacy and improve their numbers. That's what happens on Twitter, literally on a daily basis.
Yeah, you can see the sort of logic. They'll get something, will get 1,000 retweets, they'll get a couple of dozen new followers, and like you say, they just repeat the behavior. And I can't help but think of the kind of post-war move you get in the United States and also here in the UK towards sort of new right. And it basically starts in 1945. You get, the Road to Serfdom, written by F.A. Hayek. But by the 50s, the 60s, these guys are building their think tanks, they're getting their politicians, they're beginning to sort of create the foundation for what became sort of neoliberal hegemony with Margaret Thatcher and Ronald Reagan. But that was a long movement of, for instance, in this country, the Institute for Economic Affairs was started by Anthony Johnson, I believe. He was a chicken farmer. He wanted to make he met Hayek in the late 40s. He wanted to make all of this money so that he could start, these right-wing think tanks. He started, I believe, something called the Atlas Foundation. It sponsors right-wing think tanks around the world. And I think, God, what if this guy, rather than do all that, had just tweeted, and it's quite a worrying thought. You had these kind of really high energy, devoted people coming from the right, building ideas, building organizations, building candidates, building a whole different politics, waiting for, that great quote that comes from Milton Friedman about, we're about passing on the tools to the next generation of people so they have them to hand when the crisis hits. And I think, God, they did that for 40, 50 years. Had there been Twitter, maybe they wouldn't. Is that the mistake that we're making?
Possibly, but I also try to remind myself that even though it feels like Twitter is real life, Twitter is not real life. There are plenty of people out there who don't use Twitter. They don't really understand what the use of Twitter is. And, I think what we do need to focus on is finding ways to connect with workers. Because if we can organize workers, if we can find a way to focus on the one mission or the one common ground that we share, I think that we can do incredible things. I mean, when you really think about it, put all the differences aside, culture stuff, put all the culture stuff aside and focus solely on what I think the vast majority of people agree should be considered and are human rights: healthcare, housing, just food, clothing, the basics, to have a life of dignity, right? If we can focus on that, laser focus, and not get distracted by the culture wars that the elite class wants us to get involved in, then I think we can accomplish great things, even with the obstacles of Twitter and social media and all the noise that we're seeing. But it's hard. It's hard to do that. I think one of the most difficult things to do is create a culture on the left that's welcoming and forgiving, right? Because so understand what I'm saying, because I think that this is like an incredibly controversial issue and topic, and I don't want anyone to think that I'm trying to minimize the problem of racism in the country. Racism is a real problem. But racism, or the topic of racism, has been weaponized by the elite class. So when we have discussions about cancel culture, I'm not thinking about people in privileged positions getting criticized, but they still get to keep their jobs. They're still fine. I'm not talking about them. I'm talking about what, PR wise. Okay. If you are a worker and you want to align yourself with the left, but you see the left digging up old tweets and judging people based on who they used to be, it's not a very welcoming environment, right? You're not going to bring people onto your side if you're harping on things. And let's keep it real. Everyone changes. Everyone evolves. I'm certainly not the same person I was in 2009 when I started my Twitter page, right? And so I think it is important to have discussions so we can support people's evolution and, work out some of the biases that people certainly have. But I also think that it's incredibly destructive to create this unwelcoming culture and environment on the left, which will do nothing to bring workers into this movement in order to accomplish what we need to accomplish, which again is all about creating a society that provides basic human rights.